Welcome to the Startup Grind.
John Lyman. John Lyman is the head of partnerships and marketing at Google. He actually took a 2-hour trip here from the Bay Area, which is really a lot, actually. And actually, he's really a rock star because literally this event was sold out. I mean, there's more people here than attended our holiday party, and then we had free booze and drinks at our holiday party. So with that, please welcome John. John.
Thank you, and I want to recognize Derek Anderson, who drove me here, and who also is the father of all of this. He started Startup Grind, and he runs it to this day.
Cheapest Uber you've ever had.
It was a very cheap Uber.
So first off, I just want to start. Where are you from? What did your parents do, John?
From Salt Lake City, Utah, originally. I grew up probably 10 miles from Derek, but we met much later in life. I grew up in Utah. My dad did a lot of different things, but most recently he's been a lobbyist, and my mom was a journalist. A lot of my family had a journalism background, which I'm not a journalist, but I think has been interesting career training because journalists are some of the most curious people in the world, and that has led me down a meandering career path, but eventually to Google, where I'm happy to be today.
And actually, when I was looking through your LinkedIn background, you have a lot of government. Like you have a BA in government and a master's in public policy. And actually, your last job was at the Clinton Initiative.
Yeah.
So with that said, how did you go from there to working for Google?
Yeah, so I definitely have a public policy, government, political focused background. That was, I would say, the first half of my career. The second half of my career has been at Google and in tech. The short story is I was in DC. I went to college there, and then I worked there for a few years, and I loved it, but I was from out west originally, and I just wanted to get back out here. I was really excited about everything that was going on in San Francisco. This was mid-2000s, so Google had been around, and there were a lot of other companies. Facebook had just gotten big, and it just seemed like the future, so I really wanted to come out. I went to grad school at Cal, and then wanted to stay. And so in some ways it was an accident of geography, but I also had really planned to come out and try to get more involved in things in San Francisco. After grad school, I knew people at Google, talked to them, and eventually got hired on. And have done a couple of different things there, but I'm now with Google for Entrepreneurs, which I'm happy to talk more about.
So I have to ask, I hear these horror stories about the interview process at Google. Is it all that, or?
Yeah, my interview process was not terrible. I mean, I wasn't interviewing for an engineering position, so I didn't have all of these brain teasers, right? I mean, they have these questions that you hear about, like, there's a 100 foot by 100 square foot box, and how many pennies could fit inside of that? And it's less about getting the right answer and more about how you think through.
Were you asked that?
That process. No, I wasn't asked that
Okay.
because I was not interviewing for an engineering role. So my interview process wasn't that hard. It did take a long time. There were a lot of different interviews and a lot of different people that I had to meet with. That's actually changed since then because they realized that the wait was taking too long, so they now try to get through people a little bit more quickly.
Okay. So with that said, tell me about Google for Entrepreneurs. How did they get started?
Sure. So Google for Entrepreneurs is our company's effort to reach and engage entrepreneurs globally. And there are a lot of different teams that work with entrepreneurs at Google, right? So our developer relations team talks to and works with startups around Google products. Our corporate development team acquires startups. Google Ventures, which is the venture capital arm of Google, invests in startups. So there are all these different activities going on. And our team's job is not necessarily to replace any of those functions, but instead to try to act as a coordinating function where appropriate, but also just open up and help them find new opportunities. So our mission statement, we really do two things. We create spaces for entrepreneurs to learn and work, and we try to help start and sustain startup communities. And that's what we're doing with Startup Grind and a lot of other partners. This whole concept of a startup community, I think, is really interesting. It's not something that existed even 10 or 15 years ago necessarily, but now people are starting companies in very different ways, right? So instead of two people in a garage, it's a couple folks in an accelerator or in a co-working space or in an incubator. It's a little bit more urban. It's not always done in an office park anymore. It's a little bit more social. It's less isolating, I think, than it used to be. It's easier and cheaper to start a company now than it ever has been. You don't have to have your own server farm. So this is a trend that's really interesting, and I think Google wants to be a part of it, and our team is trying to lead those efforts.
So as a head of partnerships, like what type of partnerships are you kind of looking for? Or do you...
Yeah, we generally partner with 3 types of entities. So it's accelerators. So I'm trying to think of all the accelerators out there. There are many, but Y Combinator, Techstars, 500 Startups. You've heard of many of them. But these are generally defined programs that are 3 or 4 months long that take either a nascent company or just a couple of folks with an idea and try to help accelerate their growth. We partner with what we call tech hubs, which are a combination usually of co-working spaces plus accelerators plus event space. I mean, something like where we are today. Those are the types of folks that we try to partner with. We also run those spaces ourselves. We run what we call campus. So we have 2 of them live today, one in London and one in Tel Aviv. And the one in London is probably the best example of a campus. It's a 7-story building. The basement is a cafe. Then you've got event space. Then you've got a couple floors of co-working space. There's an accelerator, Seed Camp, which is the leading accelerator in Europe. And then there's a Google office on the top floor. And our goal there is really to galvanize the community, right? Google's not investing in these startups. We're not running the accelerator ourselves. That's what we partner with people to do. But we want to try to bring together like-minded people who are building technology companies and just help them in whatever way we can. So that's the second type of partnership, or like I said, owned and operated model that we have. And then the third type of partner that we often engage with are what we call community partners. So people who are just trying to build communities of entrepreneurs. And I think Startup Grind is the best example of that. They're a fantastic global organization, and we've been partnering with them for the last couple of years because they have such broad reach. And you go to an event like this, and I've been to many of them, whether it's Silicon Valley or Sacramento or Seoul, South Korea, which I'll talk about later because it was one of my favorite events. And it's just amazing to see these people from the community come together and all talk about some of the same things that they're going through.
You kind of got me when I'm trying to get water. So like, tell me about some of the partnerships that you've actually worked on.
Sure. So Startup Grind, I'll use that example because everybody knows them. We started our work with Derek, I would say, a couple years ago, and I think it's really instructive. I've told this story before, so Derek will probably not laugh anymore, but it was funny at the time. So I met Derek. I think he cold emailed me and just said, hey, we got to get together and we want to do an event in Mountain View at Google's headquarters. And I said, okay. And so we did an event. I can't even remember who he interviewed. And maybe Michael Abbott with Kleiner Perkins. And the interview went really well. And afterwards, I said, okay, Derek, we got to go. And security was kicking us out or something. And I said, hold on, I gotta clean up. We got to leave this pristine. And I thought he was going to grab some folks from Startup Grind or the security guys. And I looked over, and he was on his hands and knees, and he was picking up pizza crusts that people had left on the floor. And I said, man, this is a guy we got to work with. This guy's a hustler, and he cared so much about that event, and he cared so much about his brand and everything that he was trying to communicate. And he wanted to make sure that community left a really good impression on Google. And so we started working together. We've helped them grow globally. We've worked on a couple of diversity initiatives with them. We've been big sponsors of their annual event in February, which if you haven't been to, I would highly recommend that you all go down to, because he gets these folks from all over the world. He gets directors of Startup Grind chapters, but then also really interesting entrepreneurs. And so we've done a lot with him around that event. Other partnerships, I'll give one more example. Galvanize is a really great space in San Francisco. So it's a co-working space, it's about 5 stories, but they also have a really cool educational program that is geared towards data scientists. And this is such a growing field in the Valley and in the Bay Area right now. And so they're trying to get people to come from all over and learn more about data science. So we've worked with them a little bit on a Google perspective there because they've been interested in integrating Google into their curriculum. We've also helped them recruit candidates. We've also helped them get those candidates into startups in the Bay Area, because once you have a data science degree, you usually want to put it to work. You pay a lot of money for it, and you want to go work for a company. So those are a couple different types of partnerships that we've worked on.
So I assume there's a lot of like co-working spaces and accelerators, and I'm probably sure they're all approaching you guys for partnership. But what sort of makes one stand out over another? What grabs your attention if someone's going to approach you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we're definitely a global team. So we're looking globally. And there are a few things that work really well for us. One is that we have some sort of Google Office presence usually nearby, not 100% of the time, but oftentimes we have a Google Office, and particularly one that has engineering and technical teams, because that allows for interactions between those people at the tech hub and the Google folks, right? So engineers can go over and mentor, people can come into the Google Office, and you get that exchange. That's one thing we look for. Level of startup activity is definitely something that's important. So you want a growing, vibrant scene. In terms of actually selecting a tech hub partner, it's really interesting. You go to these places and people say, well, there are all these accelerators and all these tech hubs and incubators and co-working spaces. How do you choose? And sometimes it's hard, but more often than not, it's actually easier than you would think, because you go and you immediately, within the first day or two, understand who's really brought the community together, right? And you understand that because you talk to a lot of different entrepreneurs. You go and visit the spaces themselves, and they just have a very different level of energy and buzz about them. And then you do a little bit of diligence on the people who actually run them, and it's actually not that hard. I mean, in a couple of cases, we've been pretty split or had some questions about should we go with this one or that one. But I would say 95% of the time, you go to a place like Chicago and you go to 1871, or you go to a place like Austin, Texas, and you go to Capital Factory, and it's just pretty clear that they're the community leader, and that's the type of organization that we want to partner with.
So what are some of the areas, like, when I say area, geographic areas that you're seeing, like, they're kind of becoming new tech hubs?
Globally or in the U.S.?
Both, actually.
Okay. So globally, I would say in Europe, definitely London and Berlin, and also Tel Aviv, which I personally don't count as part of Europe, but everybody in Europe counts it as part of Europe, and then people in Israel also count it as part of Europe. So I've just sort of given up on the map situation and said, okay, if you want to count Tel Aviv as part of Europe, then go for it. So a lot of activity there. Asia is really exciting right now. I can't remember, I just looked at the numbers, but something like 3 or 4 of the top 10 privately held technology companies right now in terms of valuation are based in China. And,
right.
I think people don't really realize that, because a lot of those companies don't have a big presence in the US, right? Like Xiaomi, which is the leading mobile company in China, has not really penetrated the US market. They're very big in China and the rest of Asia, but it's just not something you hear about. And that, I think, well, first of all, I think that'll start to change, because I think more of those companies are going to come to the US. But even when they don't, I think those companies are going to have more and more of an influence, because they're going to start really breaking out of China and into different parts of Asia. So that's a big development that we've seen in the last couple of years. In the US, I mean, gosh, it's hard. I mean, so if you look at the numbers, California got more venture capital last year than the other 49 states put together. So, I mean, the data tells you one thing, but you also go to, a place like Durham or Seattle or Chicago, and you've got real companies being built there in a way that you didn't necessarily 5 or 10 years ago. Because to my earlier point, you can do it, right? I mean, you can build a team of 4 or 5 people. You can use a variety of different companies' cloud offerings, and you can just build a mobile application or a very simple website, and you can put it out to the general public, and you can see what happens. And if you get good feedback, Meerkat, which Derek is doing right now, I think is a great example of this. I mean, I think they just raised a $12 million round, and that's a lot of money, but they'd built a product and gotten it out to the world before that, right? And you can just do that much more quickly and easily than you can before. And they're actually an Israeli company, right? But yet they broke out at South by Southwest this year. So things are a lot more global than they used to be.
Do you see like companies really, and I've seen this when I go to the Bay Area, like companies that, like you had just mentioned, that came from Israel, but they go to Silicon Valley to pitch their tent, so to speak. Do you see a lot of that, or do you feel like there is a need to do that?
To relocate to Silicon Valley?
Right.
I don't know. If you're having success, I don't think you necessarily need to. It's, if you've grown a team in Iowa or, Wisconsin or something, and that's working well for you, then you don't have to do it. If you're just starting a company, I think you face a choice, right? Which is, The rents are really high in Bay Area.
Right.
In the Bay Area, it's really competitive to recruit and retain engineers. But the upside is that you've got a lot of talent there, and I think when you have a company, you don't always know what the next step is going to be, right? You hire a couple of engineers, you're building a product, suddenly you need a graphic designer. This was not something that was on your horizon before. I mean, if you're in San Francisco, you walk 2 steps down the street and you run into 5 graphic designers. If you're, in North Dakota, that's probably a little bit harder to do. You can do it, and again, the advantage is when you find that person, they're probably going to be easier to hire and more committed to your company, but there's a trade-off there.
The other thing I see in the Silicon Valley is that's where all the money is.
There's a lot of money in Silicon Valley right now.
You
Yes,
throw-
but again, there are pros and cons to that, right?
How much did you bring to give out tonight?
By the way,
We'll talk about that after.
that's why I think people came here.
For me to hand out money? All right, good. We'll achieve that goal then.
What are some of the cool stories you've seen, in your, in your position at Google for Entrepreneurs? Like any cool stories that you've seen as, entrepreneurs that you've helped out or programs that have really.
I mean, there's a lot of great stories. One of my favorites is of a guy named Freddie who started a company named Pigeonly. Does anybody know Pigeonly? So Pigeonly went through NUMMI Accelerator, which is an accelerator for African Americans, primarily in the Bay Area. And it's a really cool company. They help people who are in jail have more access to the outside world, right? So they started with a pretty simple product, which was pictures. They would mail pictures to people who are inside prisons because there are a lot of different restrictions about what folks can and can't get. And obviously you want that outside connection with the world when you're in jail. And it's a very unique story, and it's a very unique product, right? And that's something that I think is really exciting right now, is you have all these different niches that just were not served by anyone before, and now with technology and the ability to build something so quickly, you can get to these populations, and it makes for a really, really interesting story.
How did Google for Entrepreneurs help them?
So we sponsor NUMMI, the accelerator that Freddie was part of, and we got to know him through there. But he actually just recently went through Y Combinator. So
really?
he's had this really phenomenal progression that's been pretty cool.
Well, that's a big time there. Actually, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions from the audience. Anybody would like to ask John a question? Just raise your hand. Wow. Okay.
Talking about Seattle, Durham, I forget what other city, or great American cities for startups right now. What do you think Sacramento can do to join that list?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Sacramento has a lot of good things going for it, right? You've got great weather, which you laugh, but it really matters. I mean, particularly to young folks who are looking for a place to live. You've got relatively affordable costs of living for being in Northern California. You've got access to the Bay Area, but you're also not in the Bay Area per se. So, I mean, I think those are really strong attributes. What could you do as a city? I mean, definitely more things like this, right? I think that's really helpful. The money matters. I mean, I met with, I think it was Eric. Yeah, there you are. Is it Moneta Ventures?
Oh, yeah, right.
So if we had 10 times Eric in this room or in this area, that would be, a really good thing. It's, a lot of people ask what cities can do, and I guess there are a lot of things that cities can do from a tax break perspective and from a recruiting perspective, but I sometimes think of it more as what can the community do, right? So, as you go out and meet with people and talk to your friends, can you extol the values of Sacramento? Can you introduce them to people who are already here and building great companies so that they understand that there is technical talent available here and that there are different ways to build a company? That's so much of this has to be community focused. So a Startup Grind Chapter, Startup Weekend, those are all really great places to start and grow. I mean, co-working spaces, just places where people can come together and knock around ideas, that matters.
So are we actually on the radar for you guys?
So we're pretty internationally focused right now. All of our campuses that we're going to launch. So I mentioned London and Tel Aviv, which are the two that we have live right now. We're also launching campuses in Madrid, Seoul, Sao Paulo, and Warsaw. And so from that perspective, we're going to be a little bit more internationally focused, but we do have US-based partners. So yeah, absolutely. Sacramento is interesting from that perspective.
All right. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I don't know if you could speak to this, but I'm going to put it out there.
Let's try it.
Google reviews, Google Plus, what's the vision for Google with jumping into the review space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually don't know. I only know what I read in the newspapers, which is probably the same thing that you read. So my understanding of Google Plus is that we're splitting certain parts of it out, particularly the photos and the Hangouts piece, but I actually don't know any more than that. I use our reviews product from time to time, and I find it pretty useful. It seems well integrated with Maps and some of the other products, but I don't know that product roadmap per se.
I was wondering, with the companies and the campuses and the places, the groups you're working with, how many of them are self-funding or getting friends and family funding versus, VC
Right.
Or angel money?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We did a survey, and it's I don't know if it's statistically significant because our response rate was good, but not, we didn't have 100% of people writing in, so you've got to take that into account. More people had funding than you would think, although it wasn't necessarily venture capital funding, right? So obviously the most common type of funding was friends and family, but people were getting bank funding, people were getting investments from corporations, people were getting VC funding. So and it wasn't a lot, but again, to my earlier point, you don't need a lot. I mean, if you can get 25, 50, 100K, you can a lot of times get going on a little product and have a team of two and see where it goes. But it's hard work, and the fundraising, the problem with the fundraising, it takes so much time, right? Because you want to be building your product, but then you also want to be going out and raising money and trying to figure out how this is all going to work. And each company is a little bit different. I wish I had advice on how to balance those two, but they're important because you're not going to get the funding without the product, but you're not going to make the product better without the funding, and it's tough.
I think, Carrie, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. First, I want to thank you for putting this together. It's always a joy to come here. Thanks for making me fun.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. I was at an event last night of founders, and I was asked a question. I had no idea what the answer was, but I was hoping that you could help me, because I told them I was coming here and I would get back to the answer. Here's the question. How long is a company a startup?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Because if you read in the press right now, you'll see things about Uber and Airbnb and their crazy valuations. And so I think for a lot of people, what a startup means is a privately held, generally technology company. But other people, I think particularly in Silicon Valley, would tell you that Uber and Airbnb and those companies are no longer startups, right? Even though they're still privately held, they've graduated into the ranks of a larger company. And particularly as a lot of companies are delaying their IPO, you're going to see more and more of that. So I guess I would say the technical definition that, I don't know, Wikipedia or Google or others would tell you is that you're a privately held technology company. But when I think of startup, I usually think of, I don't know, fewer than 250 employees, maybe some revenue, but not, you're not at $1 billion, or your valuation is not so high that people aren't coming into work anymore because they know that they're going to cash out no matter what. To me, that's no longer a startup. But that's just my own personal definition. What do you think?
Sounds good to me. John?
What metrics do you use to gauge success?
So a few different ones. So our partners, we want to understand their level of engagement. So I'll take Startup Grind because Derek and I have had a lot of conversations around this. So, how many people are actually coming to their events? Where are their events? Are they seeing more and more chapters? What's their model? Does it seem to be sustainable? One thing that we do a lot at Google, and we also try to talk to our partners about, are different types of surveys, because so much comes out of those surveys, right? So at Google, we use something called the CSAT survey, and it's on a scale of 1 to 7, and that's by design, because if you use a scale of 1 to 10, no one will ever give 10. They'll always give 8 or 9, and so you don't really know if they love the event. If you do it from 1 to 7, actually a lot of people will give a 6 or a 7. And our goal is to always get above for an event or some sort of gathering or program that we're running. We always try to get above, on average, 6 out of 7. And it's kind of hard, right? But when you start to get below that, we understand, okay, either we didn't do something right, or the market wasn't ready, or people weren't prepared. So what can we do better? And then you also glean a lot from the comments, of course. So after this event, you would send out an email survey. Of course, you don't get 100% response, but people start saying, this is what I would have liked to have seen more. And just the very fact of a partner doing that is interesting to us, because that means that at the very least they're getting feedback, and then at some point they're probably going to act on it. So that's another way that we measure success. From campuses, the ones that the buildings that we own and operate, we have a few different metrics. So are the startups getting funded? Are the programs that we're running there ourselves effective? Are we having a lot of events? Do they seem to be building the community? At Campus London last year, we did over 1,000 events. So you can do the math on that. That's more than 3 events a day, right? And Google was probably running, I don't know, less than 10% of them. So to us, that's a huge success, because that means the community has galvanized around this, and they're running events themselves, and they seem to be popular. That's a win.
And then Derek, you had a question?
Yeah, this comes from Calgary. Joanne Reynolds, who's watching. Hi, Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
How
Wow.
much funding should a startup raise, and how much runway is needed today?
I mean,
Let's
it's
say early stage.
early stage consumer technology company. I mean, you can get started, like I said, with $50, $100, $200,000, I think. Again, it depends on what your product is and what your growth strategy is. I think in Silicon Valley, which, I mean, I think we can all agree things are a little bit out of whack right now. We'll see where it goes from here. But, I think companies will try to raise $1 million, $2 million seed round, and then pretty quickly, within 6 months or a year, if they're successful, raise a Series A. I mean, occasionally you'll see people raise a seed round and then 2 months later raise a Series A, and then 3 months later raise a Series B. I mean, that's just hyper growth. But for an early stage company, I don't know. In a place like Calgary, I think you could probably get off the ground for $100,000, $200,000.
Laura?
So in Sacramento in the last few years, we've had some global programs come here, like Startup Grind, Startup Weekend, Startup Digest. Are there other globally recognized programs that help startup communities get going that you might recommend that we look into for our area?
I mean, I think you've hit the best, right? So we're a big partner of Up Global's and Startup Weekends, and Startup Weekend Next. I don't know if Next has activity here, so Next is Startup Weekend's accelerator. So what they realize is that a lot of people are going to Startup Weekends, and for those who don't know, it's a 72-hour event where you come oftentimes with an idea and you meet other team members, and then you build and actually launch a product by Sunday. So it's fantastic, and a lot of people meet and grow and work on something, but some of those companies were moving forward and some of them weren't. And so Next was the next step in that journey. So if you came out of a Startup Weekend, or separately, if you just had an idea that you'd worked on for a little while and it was further along than you would take to a Startup Weekend, you would go to this accelerator program. It was really a pre-accelerator program. So it'd be a month or two. You'd learn a lot about customer acquisition, different techniques, and it would give people the chance to really try to figure out, okay, is this something I want to leave my day job for or really pursue 100%, or is it something that I should dial back? And after that, you could go into an accelerator or just launch your company. So that's something to think about. I don't know if Next is here. Do you?
From what I understand, they want cities with active accelerators.
I see, because they want to be able to feed into those
Right,
accelerators.
And we don't have one yet, but there's a few
coming.
people working on it.
I feel like you know something, Laura, that you're not
I
telling
just
us.
know, I suspect within the next year or so that we'll have a real
Right.
accelerator. We
Okay.
do have some programs, but they're not full-fledged.
Full-fledged accelerators,
Yeah.
yeah.
What are some of the questions you wish entrepreneurs would ask themselves prior to
Oh, good question.
going forward with the startup, and also prior to looking for funding?
Yeah, Derek and I were kind of talking about this on the ride up. Go ahead.
So the question was, what questions do you wish that entrepreneurs would ask before
Ask
themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'd say a few things. One, are you really committed to this? Because having a day job is easier in many ways, right? You have something that you're going to, and you know, or you hope is going to be there the next day, and it pays the mortgage and your family's happy and things like that. And when you're starting a company, man, it's just hard. And Derek and I have talked a lot about this too, just the very name Startup Grind. I mean, that's not an accident, right? It is a grind. And so are you committed to that? And I guess there's no way to know for sure before you jump into it, but you have to know yourself and know, is this really what I want to do? Is this the personality that I have? Is this the time in my life that I should be doing this? I think a lot of entrepreneurs should ask themselves how addicted they are to their own idea, because I see this a lot. I see people who really are passionate about this one very, very specific idea, and I think sometimes it's better to be passionate about a space or an approach rather than a very specific idea, because the fact of the matter is nobody knows if their idea is good. I mean, not Larry Page or Steve Jobs or anybody when they started their company knew for sure that their idea was good. They needed a lot of feedback. They needed feedback from people. They needed feedback from primarily customers on whether or not this was something that the market was ready for, because you can have a brilliant idea and it can be something that's going to change the world, but it can just be 10 years early, right? And so I think those are the types of conversations you have to have with yourself. In terms of what you want to know or think about before you go out and raise money, is the product ready? Is it something that you can deploy and really get in front of a venture capital investor who will take it seriously? Because a lot of these folks you can only meet with once or maybe twice before you're not going to get another opportunity. And so it's sometimes a little bit better to wait and have a product that's ready and that you can demo. And that's the other thing I would say is people a lot of times want to start just in the idea phase and take something to somebody and say, I have this fantastic idea, will you fund it? And I think a lot of the best venture capitalists are not interested at that phase. They want to see what you've executed on and where you're going before they can make a fundraising decision. And a lot of times that just means that you're going to have to work even harder and without money in the beginning to get to that point where somebody's going to want to fund it.
Question here?
You talked about in other ways where you help entrepreneurs, like in an actual office space and startup grinds. Are there also online online places where Google helps entrepreneurs, like help them move up in the search bar or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, we have some of those tools. Our team ourselves does not run that area of Google. So we have a lot of different products, cloud products, App Engine, cloud compute. Those are things that are all available online, developer tools. Obviously things like Google Apps, right? So Gmail, Drive, Calendar. I mean, those are very basic tools that I think a lot of people take for granted now, but that you can use pretty cheaply to replace a lot of the functionality that you might have at a company in your startup and just be a little bit more effective that way. The other thing that's starting to happen now, and some of this is online and some of it is offline, are just different types of educational opportunities, right? So General Assembly, Udacity, these are different companies that have online education models that didn't exist even a few years ago, and there are also more free resources out there than ever before, I think, right? You can watch lectures at MIT now for free on a variety of topics, so that's something that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago.
There's another question over here. Okay, so final question. Favorite superhero?
I think Spider-Man.
And why is that?
I don't know. The idea of swinging through New York City and being suspended from a spider web is something that seems like a lot of fun to me.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Wait, who's yours?
Superman.
Why?
He's super powerful. He can do anything, really.
I feel like I was tricked into this question. Like I had to give an answer, and then you were going to trump me with Superman no matter what I said.
No, someone says
Like, what if I'd said Wolverine? You would have just said, no, Superman's better than Wolverine. He can do anything.
No, he is, but that's beside the point.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it.